So I hope you still with me. So now we will really jump into the content of the class. So like I said, this class is really about operating in a different geographical market. And this is really a specific but important kind of market development. So the class will be divided into 5 chapters. The first one is the drivers of internationalization. Then we'll talk about the strategic motivation for going international. So it's really the why. Why should I go abroad? Then we will look at the main foreign market entry strategy, and we will ask ourselves 3 key questions. Where should we enter? So that's really the market selection. How should we enter? So it's really the entry mode. And when? So at which moment should we enter? So that's the entry timing. Then the fourth chapter is about multinational strategy and structures. And then just for information, I've put an example of a consulting project, something I did in the past. I will not go in depth to that, but some of you might be interested and attracted by this type of project and maybe as a future job. So let's start with the drivers of internationalization. And the very first step to do is to analyze which aspect of an industry is more or less prone to internationalization. What does it mean? So before looking at a company specific, you need to look at the industry. So really the sector in the broader sense of the term. And you will see that some sector, they are prone to internationalization and some others are not. And I will show example. And if you look today, well, probably we thought that the production of masks to combat pandemic was something very global, and actually maybe it should have been a bit more local. So we'll come back to that. And to assess whether an industry is more or less prone to internationalization, we use a framework that's called the YIPS Drivers of Internationalization Framework. So that's a framework that's been made by Mr. Yips, a very famous academician. And it looks actually at 4 drivers, and each driver has sub-drivers, and if you look them one by one, then you can assess whether your industry is more or less prone to internationalization. So the first driver is market drivers. Really, that's the standardization of a market. And you have 3 components in this. So first, the presence of similar customer needs or taste. Then the presence of global customers. So for example, for car components companies, they go worldwide. And then do you have transferable marketing? For example, Coca-Cola will probably do a very similar marketing in many countries. So you have drivers really related to the market. Then you have the cost drivers. First one is the economies of scale. Can you reach economies of scale? So it's mainly interesting for industry with very high product development cost. Then you have country-specific differences. So labor is obviously cheaper in some part of Southeast Asia than in Europe, and then you have the favorable logistics. The third one is the government drivers. So again, 3 sub factors: the reduction of barriers to trade and investment, the adoption of free markets, and the technology standardization. And then lastly, you have the competitive driver. So as I said, I will not read all my slides, and this you can do, but it's more important to show you an example. So that's a typical framework, and I like the design, and it's probably something to do when you assess an industry. It's really to look one by one and asking yourself, is it more or less prone to internationalization? So let's start with the snack industry, really a snack. And you start with customer needs. Are customer needs very local or very global? Well, here, you can probably assess is someone in the middle. You have obviously some specific taste in each country, but chocolate is probably something that is like everywhere. So it's somewhere in the middle. Global customer, again, in my introduction, I talk about globalization. Taste are probably more and more standard, but not totally. So again, it's in the middle. And again, for the marketing, if you think about Mars, they will probably adjust their marketing country by country, but still with some core messages that are relatively standard. So they're in the snack relatively middle. There, the independence between countries, well, again, it's in the middle, as well as the global competition. So um, I will not highlight all the aspects, but you see that here we have some kind of globalization, but not fully, and especially in terms of economies of scales. You cannot produce in one single location to provide the entire world with your snacks. So that's a low element. But you have a high level of technical standardization because you can use the same technology, the same techniques across the world. So the snack industry, so if you think about Mars, but Mars is a very global company, but still they will need to adapt to local market. Now think about the aircraft industry. First, there are very few local global players. You have Boeing and Airbus, and that's probably also a sign that it's a very global industry. So think about some very, and that's here the global competitors. So you have two players worldwide, and actually they are suffering quite a lot at the moment. But think about customer needs. The need to travel. Well, it's a global need. Everybody has it. Not everybody can afford it, obviously, but that's a global need. Think about legislation. It's quite standard. The favorable logistics, that's quite standard. The economies of scales, but obviously, they don't have a lot of factories. Boeing, Airbus, they produce in a few countries, and they try to mass produce to benefit from economies of scale. So read this, but remember, first question: is my industry prone or not prone to internationalization? And then that will help you as a company to make your strategic choices. A second, if we think about the drivers of internationalization, a second very important and interesting framework has been developed by Michael Porter. So Michael Porter, really a strategic guru. And Michael Porter, he argues that competitive advantage in the global context is really bound to location. What does it mean? So it means for him that being in one specific market gives you an advantage. It's also called the theory of national competitive advantage of industry. So this theory really suggests that the competitive advantage of certain industry in different nations depend on four elements. The first one is the factor condition. Factor condition, what does it mean? Well, it means that the price or availability of some factors of production, the factor of production, that's raw materials, but that's also land, that's also labor, can be an advantage. So let me give you examples. For example, having in one country very, very qualified and multilingual professional can be an advantage. So if you want to do global banking, a good location would be to be in Switzerland. Now, if you think about shale gas, well, if you want cheap energy, then probably being in the US, where it's allowed and favored, could be a good location. So that's one. Then you have the home demand condition. Here, what Porter's means is that if you have to deal with very sophisticated, very complex, very demanding customer in your home countries, well, then it will help you to develop abroad because you have already developed very strong capabilities and skills in your home market. Again, to example, if you start a tech business in Japan, and if you win there, if you succeed, well, then it's likely that you have an advantage to succeed globally because the Japanese, they are very technological savvy, and they are confronted to a lot of different products. You want to launch a fashion brand in Italy, well, again, you will face a lot of competition from very famous brand there, with a lot of companies producing there, a lot of skills. If you succeed, again, well, you will be recognized as someone having succeeded in a very competitive market, and it can be an asset to go abroad. That's the second one. The third one is the related and supporting industry. So it means that sometimes if you start somewhere where there are already related or competing industry, it can be a source of advantage. So think about the US. So if you start a business in the Silicon Valley, well, directly you will benefit from a full cluster of companies, of venture capitalists that are in the field, and it can be an advantage. So sometimes starting a tech business is easier in the US than in Belgium because you have all the network, you have the skills, you have the people, so there is a mass effect. Again, you want to develop components for the automotive industry. Well, being in Germany, being close to the largest manufacturers, so the OEMs, well, it can be an asset as well. And again, if you succeed there, then you're probably skilled enough to serve global customers and companies. And then the fourth factors, it's what he called the firm strategy, industry structure, and rivalry. So again, being able to succeed in a very competitive local industry, it pushes you to excel and not to be complacent, and therefore to be better. Again, if you want to do investment banking and you're in London, you are forced to be outstanding to succeed, and then you can probably address continental Europe. Same if you want to launch a luxury brand in Germany, you need to compete against Mercedes, Audi, BMW. You will need to be outstanding to win there and then to go abroad. So I've been a bit schematic, but that's really what the Porter means. It means that starting somewhere can be a source of advantage and inversely. So it really underlines the environmental condition and structural attributes of nation and their region that contribute to their competitive advantage. So that's important to keep that in mind. Then let's not forget that doing business abroad, it's not a given. It's not that easy. It's challenging. And often foreign firms have to overcome what we call a liability of outsidership. That's really the inherent disadvantage that outsiders experience in a new environment because of the lack of familiarity with local context and networks. So that's what the diagram shows. Think just about all the differences in regulation, languages, cultures, norms, and really your ability to operate depends on your familiarity with the local context. Thus, this liability of outsidership increases the more a firm's origin differ from the host environment, and we'll come back to that. Today, we take it for granted that Coca-Cola is global, but they're to fight for that, and they're to adapt to the different local markets. So it's not a given, right? I've been fast, but as I said, everything is written there, and I think I've highlighted the most important. So very important in this chapter to keep in mind the four drivers of internationalization as defined by Yip. So first, you need to know if your industry is prone or not prone to internationalization, and then again, where you start can be a source of advantage. Doesn't mean that you cannot start something in Belgium, of course not, but sometimes you need to think about where you locate your activity, that's for sure. And then never take it as granted. Going abroad is difficult. It is challenging, but it's of course sometimes and often needed and fun as well, right? And then I go quickly into the second chapter. It's quite straightforward and self-explanatory. So why do you go abroad? Why? And usually you have four main reasons. The first one is market seeking. You need to grow. You need to and to grow, you need to access different countries. And think about Uber. They started in a few cities in the US, and very quickly they moved to the entire world, and then now they focus on the Western world. A second reason might be the natural resource seeking. You might need some particular resources that you cannot find on your local market. Think about Shell. That's a Dutch company, but obviously for oil, but even for renewable resources, they need to expand. Efficiency enhancing. It's again the need for scale and the access to low cost factors. So I'm not saying it's good, but it's a motivation. And the last one is capability enhancing. Really, it's your quest for new ideas and technology. If you think about Geely, which is a Chinese automotive brand, well, they acquire Volvo, a European brand, and it was probably also to access their technology, their intellectual capital, and then to leverage that and to use it to go abroad.